Great. Welcome, folks. We are delighted to kick off our January Lightning Talks with a slew of really wonderful ideas and presentations brought to you from all over the world. So my name's Jenren Wetzler. I'm the Director of Learning and Training. I'm going to be moderating this set of 7-minute presentations and also trying to keep folks to those 7 minutes. So forgive me in advance if I interrupt you. We'll try to keep the flow going as quickly as we can. And if there is time at the end, I'll invite the audience to pose any questions that they can to the speakers. But feel free to type in your questions in the chat space on the side, and that way folks can have a conversation going as the presentations continue. Okay. So first up, I'm delighted to introduce Open Education from K to Gray, Climate Literacy and Empowerment. This is by Kurt Newton. Kurt Newton is the director of MIT OpenCourseware and has a personal mission to put open education in service of equitable climate action. At MIT, he serves on its climate education working group and holds a community of practice for colleagues doing open climate work. As a citizen, Kurt is an active facilitator with the En-ROADS simulator on the leadership team of the Boston Green New Deal Coalition and lives in a net zero energy retrofit home. Very cool. All right, Kurt, over to you.
Thanks, Jenren. Okay. I want to get started by wishing Wikipedia a happy 24th birthday. It's January 15th. They were born 24 years ago today. I couldn't let that go by. So we're so glad that you were born, Wikipedia. So climate change for decades, many decades, has been this thing in the future. All the studies and the modeling that's going on, trying to understand the direction we're heading, the trajectories our greenhouse gas emissions need to be on, the things that will be happening around the planet, kind of looked in the future. That is no longer the case. The future is clearly now, and impacts are being felt, and solutions are rolling out, all with this rapidity that I think just a few years ago would have caught us very much off guard. I want to pose the question here, amid all of this change, what if we got it right? Thank you, Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, for this wonderful book title. And specifically, what if the role of open education really got it right in this swirl of change that's happening? I'm going to suggest that part of getting it right here is to expand the scope of what we think open education might be capable of to this broader K to Gray climate literacy and empowerment. We no longer have the luxury of kind of focusing on sort of classic in the classroom, let's reach students, younger students, and let them make their way out in the world to take this stuff on with this new knowledge. We need to reach all ages and all sectors now. And so, yes, that includes students at all grades, but also their parents, workers of all forms, and professionals, citizens and civic leaders with this rapidly developing emerging knowledge. It has been said, and I think it bears repeating again, that the world we're heading into, all jobs become climate jobs, and frankly, all classes can become climate classes. I'm using climate as a bit of a shorthand for this talk. You know, really what we're facing is I think we're all aware, these intersecting polycrisis situation. The fact that climate action, you know, intersects with every one of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals means that when we are working on climate change, we're also working on these other issues that are really important. And I want to acknowledge, you know, sort of a debt to this work of Elizabeth Sawin around multi-solving. She just published a book on multi-solving, which is a wonderful distillation of thinking about how when we take action on a particular thing, keeping open to, you know, the ways that those impacts will ripple out. So working on climate is not only a climate solution, but also impacts human health, equitable living standards, healthy ecosystems, and so forth. So just for the day, I'm using climate as a shorthand for this intersecting thing. So open education, we're, I think, all familiar with the 5 R's rights that we operate with. Specifically, when we're thinking about climate, what do those 5R rights lead to? Really important things. You know, for K to Gray around the world, important that we have no barriers to access, and the adaptability means that, you know, The emerging knowledge is rapidly adaptable to local contexts. We can translate it through different languages and levels around the world. And very important, the open pedagogy spirit of bringing, more expertise into the equation is central. Finally, that these practices mean that this knowledge is sustainable through disruptions, whether it is natural system disruptions or disruptions of politics. Very important that those rights will carry us forward. There's also, I know, ongoing work to be had, and especially around work on climate and our relationship to the natural world. So important to be holding the space and how we include indigenous knowledge practices. Great gratitude for how the last couple of Open Education Global gatherings have centered indigenous OER practices, those 6 Rs, that Kayla Larson spoke about in Edmonton a couple of years ago, for instance. Holding these things in a two-eyed seeing sense with our sort of traditional OER practices. There's work to be done ahead, and that's also a very important part of the equation. So I want to focus, a little attention on what we are seeing, within the open education world, that learners are ready for this stuff, and in many ways, perhaps more than we realized. At OpenCourseWare, among our 2,500 or so courses that we've published, about 200 of those from across the curriculum touch upon climate change. So there's a lot of content that's out there in the world. When we think about how that intersects with our users, it stands out that, among the millions of engagements that we get every month on OpenCourseWare, about 45% of those people are not in a school setting. As important as the school setting is, how much of this attention is coming from kind of the broader community. And I think we're seeing the signs of what could be possible for K to Gray more broadly, that among these users, 60% of them are not of classic college age. 50% of those users don't have a college degree. And this is engaging with materials from MIT from the MIT classroom. So, I think it's worth just like reflecting how much more expansive we might be able to be with what we consider climate open education resources. Yes, the textbooks, the open pedagogies, the modular lesson plans are all really important, but also, these are like really engaging entry points that we might be able to roll out for people who are just curious, looking for a little something to check out. Community engaged libraries of case studies and toolkits and these online simulators, which are all available also under Creative Commons license, ought to be part of the mix of what we consider open educational resources. What else? Well, there is so much stuff out there, building upon the important work that people have been doing with repositories and thinking about search tools and the wonderful work that our OER librarians are doing. We got to pay attention to what AI is going to be doing for sure and make sure that it's treating this stuff well. So I wanted to close with a really hopeful story, something that I've been personally involved with the last few years that shows what could be possible here. It's a nonprofit called HEAT, working in the gas leaks space for a number of years ago. They decided intentionally to share their materials under an open license, CC by SA specifically. That open license library caught the attention over the last year or so as they've been moving into this new networked geothermal space, caught the attention of the World Bank, International Finance Corporation. Because those materials are open licensed and encouraged adaptations, it has really accelerated dramatically the scope, the speed, the scale of getting these things around the world, around the world, because those materials were shared openly licensed. All this got started because we started with an OER that turned into all of these great things. So invite you to join me in this work. You want to grab that QR code and fill out this little form, and love to be in touch. We think about this together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kurt. That was fantastic. All right, I know we've got some stuff going on in the chat space, and we are actually out of time, so I'm gonna move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Catherine Cure. So Catherine will be presenting using both FLOSS and CC licensing in OER development and policy. Catherine Curie is the chapter lead of Creative Commons South Africa and a pracademic with an increasingly strong focus on enabling and supporting OER, not just in South Africa, but generally within the Global South, focused on specific challenges. She has a strong focus on policy development. Thank you so much for joining us, Catherine.
Thank you, Jenron. And I'm so glad to see my co-conspirator, Jonathan, here, because this actually arose out of some policy development work, OER policy development work I was doing for the Namibia University of Science and Technology, and where I realized that there was a gap in terms of software licensing and how to align it with the CC licenses, and I reached out to Jonathan and also to Andrew Renz, who's a legal scholar and policy expert who looks at law and technology. And so the real question was, what do you do? Because you can't just go into university and say, oh, well, these are the licenses, these are OER, please make sure that you understand what is and isn't an OER, and oh, for software, well, I don't really have any kind of ideas for you. In terms of, I'm going to talk, they always talk about bottom line up front. It's apparently US military. So our objectives is there's not much to do in 7 minutes. And so really, I was just wanting to make people, it was more about awareness raising and in terms of the dual licensing of software with the appropriate FLOSS license as well as your CC licensing. And then secondly, we felt it was really important to give some kind of a guidance. And for that, we looked at people with a lot of expertise within your software environment. And then we've got a very brief discussion of the augmented spectrum of CC licenses and how we can map these onto some, but not all of the FLOSS licenses. We also we decided that, yes, we might as well throw the cat amongst the pigeons, and that we have a very clear advocacy in terms of specific licensing and what they mean. And obviously, Andrew, having worked in both copyright and technology, had some very clear ideas around the importance of your CC by SA and what it does in terms of also locking it as an open, locking with the SA locks it open. So we decided we'll nail our colors to the mast and be very clear that this was what we were thinking of. And I know that there's lots of debates or whatever, but this is where we are prepared to, having thought through it, made a very clear. So when in doubt, if we go down to the BLFU, when in doubt, we say CC by SA 4.0 in terms of your OER, and then GPL for software and other dynamic objects, and for databases, CC0, the public domain dedication tool. So now you've got it all. You don't need to watch the rest. So obviously what happens is that not all OER are static objects, and we are increasingly seeing that, especially within education, you have textbooks which are Jupyter notebooks, simulations. I'm not going to read through all of these. You're all capable of reading. And this was, again, something that we've really got to bear in mind, because if you just go to university and say, okay, well, we've dealt with the CC licenses, but for software, you're on your own, I just felt that it was inadequate. And if I actually looked at what was available, both in terms of UNESCO and the Commonwealth of Learning, they were actually silent. When I actually went back to find what guidance was there in terms of both UNESCO and Commonwealth of Learning, there wasn't specific guidance around software. And then I was going through a lot of the CC, and I mean, CC is very clear that the CC licenses don't apply to software in particular because of issues of patent, but then where do you go? And we are very aware of the fact that within the software community, there has been great and exacting attention paid to the software licenses. So it's more, how do you go to an educationalist? How do you go to your learning, teaching and technology or academic academic and support people and give them some kind of guidance in terms of when they're developing policy, what they need to look at. So it was quite a clear sort of audience around educational policy and the creation of policy that also is practical, that they can say, okay, I've got a template, because you have to also create guidelines. I've got a template and I actually have I can sort of start, or at least I've got some idea, and I can also start asking the right questions of my colleagues. So what we did find was that we do obviously use the term floss because the Libre makes it clear that it's free as in speech, not beer. So they are free to use, but not necessarily free in terms of gratis for nothing, and also obviously open source. So what I did find actually going through your CC documentation was that there was a very clear relationship with your GNU General Public License, your CC BY essay, which I've put down there. And then the CC0 Public Domain Dedication tool is GPL compatible and acceptable. So but obviously the CC licenses do not provide guidance relating to source code distribution, do not address patent rights, and are generally incompatible with the major software licenses. But these are the two very notable exceptions, which are actually detailed very nicely in your documentation on your site. So it was there. It was just when you asked the question, you actually found it. And at least with Andrew, we were then guided through it. So if we're going to, this is what we've said, this is choose the appropriate license or legal tool. I think I've pretty much already said it. Static content, use Creative Commons, and then it's CC BY 4.0 or CC BY SA 4.0. Dynamic content, floss, you can use MIT or the GPL, but again, Andrew felt that the GPL was a more I'm not going to go into the reasons. You can go into that. And then databases, it is the gold standard to use the CC0 in terms of the public domain dedication tool. And we then did a little graduated spectrum of licenses. So you can look at open access, definitely not OER, UNESCO and CC, OER per Cape Town Declaration. Anyway, so that was something that we were just like sifting through in terms of where we were going. And yeah, I think that's pretty much in a nutshell what we had. This is our key takeaway. And that was what we are working with. And I think that's it. I didn't want to, I'm done.
That's fantastic with 3 seconds to spare. Well done.
Okay.
Time. Okay. Thank you so much. And those tables are so helpful at distilling a lot of complex information into very accessible terms. So we would love to have access to your PowerPoint after this if you're willing. Wonderful.
We did another one which doesn't map to the licenses. Myself, Jonathan, and Paul Wested we'll send that to you as well. Jonathan's got them on his website for easy access, so we've got a link.
Thank you, and thanks, Jonathan. All right, I think Delmar may not be able to join us today, so we're going to switch to the next presentation. This is Facilitating Eco-Literacy for SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, using online tools for lifelong learning by Suma. So Suma Parahakaran is the Senior Research Fellow at the International University in Malaysia and serves as a visiting professor at American University of Sovereign Nations. She was also part of the task force of training teachers to integrate values and ethics into the curriculum content for the UN Habitat Water Education Project. Suma has completed a project on climate change with schools here in Malaysia, Thailand, and Laos. Suma, thanks so much for joining us, especially given the late hour it is for you.
Hello, everyone. I'm following up on the last lightning talk where I did something on SDG and ethics and values. I've been researching quite a bit on this topic for eco-literacy in schools, both primary and secondary, and it can be taken up to higher education as well for OERs and teaching in classroom. And I'm glad that, thank you, Creative Commons, for giving me this opportunity. The bioethics model, which I had compiled for my PhD dissertation, it's originally taken from New Zealand by Rennie and Saunders in 2013. But that particular model, I found that it covers a lot of requirements by the UNESCO SDG goals, and it complies with a number of lessons from both Asia as well as in the West. And the bioethics model could be taken in the higher education quite seriously, in the sense that it talks about human rights, it talks about consequences and harms and pluralism. It touches on all these different topics that UN propagates. So this model, I'd shown it earlier, but now I've added technology intervention on the left, that's generative AI. And I find that many of the Asian students within my context, they use a lot of generative AI, especially for at the PhD level, masters and graduate levels. And I think they do use in schools as well, because most of them have mobiles now in schools. And so they are doing their projects using this. This model looks complicated, but it's actually very easily adaptable in schools, because it starts from how the teacher can start preparing the lesson and what kind of strategies they can use. On the right, you can see that I've added in bioethics, human values discussion. And it can include political, technological, social, economic, spiritual, traditional, indigenous, minorities, and right-based. So as we go to the top of the model, we do touch on the ethical decision-making as well. So it covers almost all the UNESCO goals, as well as what we want to teach for the future generation and the present generation because of the climate issues that we are facing. And these are the different strategies we can use. They can do posters, they can design a pamphlet, debates, newsletter, posters, role play, small group discussions, speech bubbles. So all these that we see can be adapted at primary as well as at the secondary level. It can be also taken to some of these strategies can be taken up to in higher education system as well. And I have tried using some of these, and I find that it really works with STEM education. And we did one with Southeast Asian teachers. We tried to use some of the strategies from here, and we found that the most difficult aspects for teachers to actually break through is trying to collaborate and reflect. They have the content, they know the context, they have the knowledge from the internet. But then how do they reflect to come together and reflect on the particular context, and how to bring in some kind of solution where they can try to implement within their own context. And in Southeast Asia, even within Laos, Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia, I find that the context is quite different, and people focus on different aspects of the climate issues because of the varied climate problems that we are facing now within Southeast Asia. We are sorry about the fire that is happening in LA, but we have a lot of floods here. So our problems are different. And just this year, we found that Malaysia and Kedah, a place where our paddy used to come from, we have lost a lot of rice. So I find that the issues are very different in Southeast Asia. So the issue is that when we take up models from elsewhere, it might not work in our region. So teachers have to be very critical about this, how they're going to use it for each context. And then the learner characteristics for eco-literacy, this was compiled from a bit of research done by me: inquiry-based learner, reflective learner, self-directed, and experiential learner. All the four can be used for the bioethics model as well. When Rennie and Saunders formulated the model in 2013, they did for individual inquiry, not for collective. So mine is based more for a collaborative team. So what I did was, when I adapted the model, I've added in the collective inquiry apart from individual inquiry. So that's the difference. So this is today's, we've changed the term for nature to environment, and now it's become ecological. Ecology is so important now, this particular term. So for eco-citizens, from my research, what I compiled, the learner has to not only look at local and global issues, financial literacy, digital-driven literacy, interdisciplinary, cross-cultural, and eco-social media literacy. Of all this, we find that in Asia, eco-social media literacy will work very well because of Facebook. And a lot of students and learners here, the non-formal learners as well, they use TikTok. And we find it very popular here. They love to do TikTok. So I think this will work here if we implement anything on eco-literacy, the tools that we can use, and we are using now tablets, laptops, computers, whiteboard, audiobooks, videos, smartphones, and multimedia, I think, and linguistic ecology, which I think is very important, especially with generative AI. Most of our students have learned more vocabulary because of generative AI. And AI is helping. It's just that how are we going to use it in classroom and how to get the student to think critically? That we've got to be very careful, because I think when we use media for eco-literacy, though generative AI will bring in all the responses from everywhere and the internet, as long as the server allows it, what the issue that we face here is that how it can be used for just for learning, but at the same time, if it is on wider social media as an OER, we find that it can be used for thinking critically, a strategy to think critically, and so that would work. Then these are all the different values for human values and ethics, which I've just compiled from various sources. I thought I'll just flash that around. And again, eco-literacy has left this out, especially in this part of this world, on prevention and preparedness, disaster risk management, hazards such as oil and coastal erosion, groundwater, and inland flooding. So all have to be compiled together for eco-literacy. And some of these topics that I think we can...
One more minute. We're at time. Sorry.
I'm done. That's my references.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'll be very happy to share what we have, and also to collaborate with people from the other speakers who are wanting to use more content for the environment. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Suma. That was lovely. All right. I know we are actually running a little bit ahead of schedule as we did not get to have Delmar's presentation. So I'm going to take one question from the chat right now from Sebastian. How are you validating intended learning outcomes for social media usage? You stated that people like to use TikTok and Facebook for informal learning, but you also stated that their vocabulary has grown. How did you get this insight? And I think that's probably for Suma.
Yeah. Okay. We are very much backward when it comes to knowledge. The learners, they only know about recycling, pollution, etc. So I think for current knowledge, just to enhance their knowledge as well as to get interested in environment, we can use social media. Unfortunately, we have not done any assessment. The main urgent need that we need now is to let children know about the problems, because it is not there in the curriculum. So perhaps maybe we could look into assessment as well. And also it depends on the teacher, how the teacher uses the lesson. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sebastian says thanks. All right, we have time for one last question. If anyone has any live questions that they would like to ask the previous three speakers, and if not, we'll move on to our next speaker. Any live questions? All right. Well, we are going to move on to our next speaker, Jonathan Ports. Jonathan will present open tools for Google Docs to Pressbooks migration and related thoughts about what makes for good platforms for OER. So Jonathan Ports is a former mathematics and computer science faculty member and OER coordinator at a public university in Colorado in the US. He's a former member of the Colorado State OER Council, a volunteer in many open ed orgs, and an ongoing facilitator for the CC certificate course. And he now calls himself a gig worker for open education. He lives in Pietrasanta, Italy. And thank you so much for joining us.
There we go. I unmuted. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna go quickly. I want to do sort of a very specific talk about a very specific project I worked on since I became a gig worker, and I hopefully use as a jumping off point for talking about platforms and even sort of hinting towards sustainability in the OER space. So let's see. So it seems like a fairly common workflow in our community is to create or adapt OER in Google Docs and then to share them with students in Pressbooks. Today, I'm going to call this the GD to PB workflow. I've done this with two organizations I work with, Open Oregon Educational Resources and the Washington State Board of Community and Technical Colleges, two amazing organizations with really amazing people. It's been a delight to work with them, even though they are 9 time zones away from where I live now. Why do people use these platforms? I have a whole lot of pros and cons of Google Docs versus Pressbooks on this screen. I'm not going to go through all of them. Just for the purposes of this presentation, I think the most important ones are Google Docs is WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, is the WYSIWYG acronym. But mostly, Google Docs supports collaboration very well. You get a simultaneous modification of a document, so teams of authors, OER authors can work together. I think the thing about Pressbooks is there's a great math educator who talks about an obstacle with learning math is that things look very mathy. And when things look mathy, people get scared of them. And I think that that's sort of the same thing happening here with OER. The thing about Pressbooks is it looks booky. It looks textbooky, what comes out of Pressbooks. And whether or not that's really important in the long run is interesting. Obviously, also, the Pressbooks directory is a great place for discovery of OER, is a great place that has been a wonderful benefit to the community. I think a serious drawback for Google Docs is extreme surveillance capitalism. I almost guarantee that unless you spent a fair bit of time digging into this, as I have done and people I read have done, you are not aware of how bad the surveillance capitalism is that goes on when you innocently share with a couple of colleagues editing a document in Google Docs. It is doing things to you. You have no idea how you're being chopped up and sold to various people on the net. Also, the reason I have problems with Pressbooks as a solution is that I think of it as a heavyweight solution to a lightweight problem. It's based on WordPress, which is a very complicated system that is extremely popular, although I don't really understand why. Anyway, let's move on. The main thing, actually, for both of them that is important for this talk is that both of those operate rather poorly. So, for example, in this GDPB workflow, many people, the big problem you have to do is starting with a textbook in Google Docs, get into Pressbooks as quickly and painlessly and accurately as possible. Quickly and painlessly, because you have to do it over and over again. You don't want to have to do this by hand. You don't want to have a lot of pointing and clicking. And also, that word accurately is doing a lot of work there. We want to preserve all the accessibility features that you built in on one side, and we want to be able to use somehow in Google Docs to indicate that we want to use the fancy features that Pressbooks does have, like embedded videos and H5P and things like that. Platforms don't really like to allow interoperability. That's part of this word people have probably heard the word enshittification that Cory Doctorow coined recently. It's that platforms like to sort of control you and control your exit because it gives them more power. So anyway, but surely, come on, surely this must be nearly automatic. Google Docs has an export feature. You can export to Microsoft Word, and Pressbooks Import has an import feature for Microsoft Word. The problem is it turns out that doesn't really work. The thing that was a deal breaker with the organizations I was working for is that it loses all alt texts from Google Docs. So if you're interested in accessibility, that's just not a way you can go. It's also unclear how to get those things from in Google Docs to indicate something in Pressbooks that you might care about taking advantage of the Pressbooks' nice features. So one way to have it to indicate what you want is to add some decorations to your text, like embed shortcode or a GL shortcode in square brackets. That's making your document to something of a markup language. Markup language is a scary term again. Like HTML is a markup language. TeX is a markup language for typesetting mathematics. It's the one I use all the time. But anyway, if you're willing to tolerate markup languages, you can put something in Google Docs to make pretty things happen in Word. So this is in Pressbooks. Here's what I was doing I was exporting, and if you export from Google Docs, you get horrible HTML. Fortunately, the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, has a tool to make HTML look prettier called Tidy, and it's of course Floss software. Still not good enough, so I wrote some code. Well, one nice thing is it keeps the alt texts, so then we have those alt texts. If you see that alt text is in that image tag right there. So I wrote a lot of Python code that does a lot of that massages all this HTML to get it ready to be used in Pressbooks. And then I wrote some Python code also, which drives a web interface. It's a tool called Selenium that allows me to automatically upload all of these HTML fragments to Pressbooks. So there's a path, and the nice thing about having is the intermediate step of having everything in HTML on my laptop when I'm doing this work with these organizations is that I can write little pieces of code that will do automatic things that you can't do in Google Docs. Like Google Docs, if someone said, let's turn all of the heading level 3s in this book into heading level 1s, there's no way to do that in Google Docs. But if you have it in HTML on your machine, you write a little piece of Python code, like this is a piece of Python code that I wrote to do something similar, and you can do that nicely. Okay, so here's the workflow in summary. In Google Docs, use all of the accessibility features with care, do a little bit of markup language, export as HTML, use the W3C's tidy program, do things in Python to make things in your HTML look even nicer, upload things to Pressbooks using the Selenium package to get things to drive the web interface to Pressbooks, and drink a celebratory beverage of your choice. When you're done, I prefer espresso. I made a piece of software to do that. The nice thing about doing open source software is you get to choose a cute name. Since it's Godot, Google Docs 2 Python, I'll call it Godot 2P, and I found an openly licensed image for someone who was doing a production of Waiting for Godot somewhere, and so I can use that as the title page. So here's the conclusion. Platforms for adopting, adapting, creating OER must provide good support for things like collaboration, discoverability, automation, interoperability. It must avoid surveillance capitalism, platform lock-in. And it probably involves using plain text files wherever possible, so you can write bits of code like I do to fix things, and probably some markup language, or there's a very simplified version of markup called Markdown. In fact, we should use this famous phrase called protocols, not platforms. Don't stay away from specific platforms. They get you locked in, but learn some general principle. Like Google, like Creative Commons licenses are kind of a protocol. Here's my TLDR on the conclusion. Interop is fundamental. Don't be afraid of markup languages. And also, think about sustainability. Why are we trying to make our OER look like commercial textbooks? So I used to talk about the beauty of ugly OER. Let's make ugly OER and share them with our students. They may be pedagogically extremely effective. That's where we are. I'm going to take a second to plug. I'm making a podcast called The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, The Theory and Practice of Resistance. Its first episode drops on Inauguration Day. And we'll talk about tech and the new world we're living in.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was fantastic. I know you've got some comments in the chat, and we look forward to exploring your website more and digging in a little bit more. So thank you. Okay, now let me turn to our next speaker, who unfortunately is in a low bandwidth area, so I have his video recording. This presentation is called OER for Systematic STEAM Learning, and STEAM is Science, Technology, Education, Arts, and Math. So OER for Systematic STEAM Learning in Primary School by Fernando Daguano. Okay, and Fernando is a maker, educator, and entrepreneur, and Alquimetricos founder. All right, bear with me as I try to share his video. Can I get a thumbs up if you can see that? Hopefully. Okay.
Hello, everyone. This is Fernando Daguano from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm a maker and OER developer, and I'm the founder of Alquimetricos. For those who are new to the Alquimetricos universe, let me do a brief introduction. This year, we are proud to celebrate a whole decade developing hands-on STEAM OERs targeted especially to vulnerable communities. Alquimetricos is a multidisciplinary network of educators, makers, designers, and communicators. We created the product of our own design, a minimalistic and inexpensive building block system consisting of a set of sticks that are interconnected through perforated hubs, aka the Alquimetricos. During the past decade, we played with almost 45,000 children and trained around 1,400 teachers from nearly 70 cities in 10 countries. Among others, we gained global recognition with the help of the MIT Media Lab, the Gathering for Open Science Hardware Community, Red Bull Basement, and obviously Creative Commons. We detected that we needed not only a set of instructions and guidelines, but easy to deploy activities for the classroom. We created a deck of cards that can be downloaded through our repository. It helps to deploy multiple games that introduce the Alkymmetricos methodology along with the desired curriculum content. Remembering that we target vulnerable communities, our strategy was to develop a product that was much cheaper to buy compared to mainstream products. The free-to-download version is intended to cost the final user's community 1/100th of the cost of a commercial equivalent product. Anyone can download the source file from our repository and locally fabricate the building blocks as well as the deck of cards. We encourage the auto-production through analog or digital fabrication techniques as part of our maker and do-it-yourself core purposes. Alternatively, we can produce and sell the deck of cards along with the kit of building blocks so families and teachers can buy and use out of the box. The final kit will look like a Tupperware with connectors, sticks, the deck of cards, and instructions. This particular kit serves a dozen of kids from 5 to 8 years old for about an hour. There are different types of cards with objectives, challenges, and complexities that can be combined to configure different gameplays. A set of instructions for children as well as educators is provided, focusing on game, handcrafting, construction, math, and other subjects. That guideline list is growing organically thanks to the spontaneous crowdsourcing that comes with deployment and training. Half a dozen different ways of playing were documented and shared with the original version, but a new one is born barely each time that somebody organizes a new workshop. The gameplay is strongly focused on developing psychomotor skills, especially in this era full of screens. As we are not directly or permanently funded by any government or institution, we have to develop a material that was cheap to buy and easy to replicate through auto-production, but that could also help us keep the project funded and open. The Alkymmetricos Kit Zero was conceived like a modular system, with different deck of cards for different ages, complexities, subjects, and more. The Kit Zero for ages 5 to 8 is already available in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. 2 other deck of cards for older ages are under development. Again, everything is modular, flexible, and intended to cover a wide spectrum of curricular content, not only the explicit STEAM approach. The Alkymmetricos Lab is our OER repository where you will find tutorials, guidelines for both children and educators. You can download all the product assets so you can recreate the retail box experience locally. The fully editable files are also shared there, so you can remix, create upon our templates, translate, crowdsource, or do whatever you want with them. All the Alkymmetricos assets are fully open, including commercial use, brand and logo use, and even the sustainability model is open. The recipe for our cake is shared along with the product in both physical and digital version, so anyone can replicate and grow a kit from scratch or from a seed. The blueprints and instructions for the production of the Alkymmetricos Hub is available at alkymmetricos.cc/laser. You can use cheap hand tools and recyclable materials, as well as laser cutters to produce your own kits. We want to thank to the Creative Commons and OER community that have helped us so much to make this project reach this stage. If an independently held initiative like us survived through the COVID pandemic, it's because of the global network that supported us in so many ways. To celebrate this decade of creation of OERs, we invite you to download, use the kit, and give us feedback. Feel free to share and help us disseminate and make Alkymmetricos available where hands-on STEAM education is hard to materialize. Get in touch. Maybe buy a kit for yourself or donate one to a community in South America. We need an army of fellow whistleblowers that help us identify opportunities and take Alkymmetricos and the Kit Zero around the world, especially to the Global South. Thank you and see you soon. Happy sharing.
All right. Wonderful. My son actually has a kit and just loved exploring with it. So Wonderful. So we're going to move on now to our last presenter, Derek Moore. Derek will be presenting Unfurling the Open Umbrella. Derek Moore is an independent ed techie, critical instructional designer, content developer, project manager, and open practitioner based in South Africa. Thanks, Derek.
Thanks, Chinran. It's nice to be with you. I'm just trying to find you now. Excellent. Right. Hello, everybody. Just checking you can see me. There is a storm ahead, and I have got my umbrella with me. I'm not sure if you can see it, but this is what it looks like, and it's actually putting umbrellas up and down indoors gets really clumsy and messy, and what we find often when we have to kind of deal with the storm is we actually are quite unprepared for it, and we panic and we try and do something really quickly, and maybe we need to be thinking a little bit more proactively. Because what I'm starting to see is teachers and academics are finding it far more difficult to use ed tech with all the pressures they have on them. Jonathan, you talked a bit about extractive ed tech or surveillance capitalism. And I certainly think that the cost of tech and the cost of AI is starting to make me ask a few questions about sustainability. I'm not an anti-tech. I love it. I enjoy it all the time. But I think we need to be asking ourselves a few more critical questions, and these questions are especially from the global south. And what I think we perhaps could be doing is we could be looking at something called the open umbrella. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to share a link to the open umbrella with you, and then you can look at it and see what it is, and then I'll share the presentation later with you. Okay. Let's see if you can see that. Is it opening? Yeah, okay. Okay. So that's the open umbrella. And essentially what the open umbrella is it is a systematic way of looking at how to create a course. And if you start to look at the links up at the top, you'll see that there are 8 different colors, and each of those colors represent a different element. So those colors that are the orange colors are assessment. Those colors that are greenish or design, yellowish, or I can't remember them. But when you look at them, you'll see that each color represents a different element of creating a course. Okay, so what we've got then is we've got the open umbrella, but how do we use it? Because, I mean, each time the storm rolls around, it seems to be there's a different challenge. I mean, over in my part of the world, we've had storms like Fees Must Fall, where universities were entirely shut and you weren't able to go to university. And I imagine in the US, in the next couple of months or maybe years, things are going to get a little bit tight in higher education and schools as well, as kind of Kurt intimated. And what are some of the storms that you're facing over there? So I know that when we're in trouble, we don't try to do things by ourselves. We actually work together with other people. And so what I've done is I've set up a little newsletter on Substack where I'm trying to share things around the open umbrella. I've also got the open umbrella that I showed you earlier on. And then I've also put the open umbrella on GitHub, which means that you can actually do interesting things with it as well and adapt it. And so what I'm inviting you to do is to unfurl the open umbrella with me. And the umbrella really is very simple. It's one, you look at the strong and weak points of your assessment practices, your design practices, your support practices, those 8 areas I talked to you about, okay? And then after doing those things, you then look to the field guide and find perhaps resources that can assist. But if you look carefully on the field guide, you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a hypothesis link. And if you click on that hypothesis link, you'll see there's the makings of an early discussion. And you're invited to kind of join me in discussion around there. And then the last part is, and I haven't developed this, is I think once we've started creating our own resources and sharing it with our class, we need to have digital badges. But instead of me awarding you a digital badge, what if your students awarded you a digital badge for the area that you were focusing on that semester? Okay, so these are the 3 elements of the project. There's a field guide. There's a self-assessment app. There's a field guide, and there's also digital badges. And to make it available, as Jonathan was suggesting, we need to find ways to share our work. He spoke about Pressbooks and Google and wanting alternatives. I've been exploring GitHub, and I found it hell of a fun. And I'd love to find a few other people that would like to join me. And really, I'm asking the question. Some of us are interested in incremental innovation and supporting what's going on in our existing courses. Some of us are interested in disruptive innovation and kind of changing things quite dramatically. But for me, the common point between us is we are all kind of proponents of open education resources. And if we kind of share our work and share our licenses and work together, then we can do great things. So are you ready for the next storm? Well, I'm not sure, but with some of these resources, I hope you will be able to. And if you'd like to join me, please go ahead and subscribe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to explore this further. I love what I'm seeing on this website. So thank you for sharing this resource. And with plenty of time to spare, we've got 13 seconds left. Well, bravo, everyone. You did a fantastic job presenting a lot of really important information and relevant tools to all of us in such an abbreviated time. I want to thank all of our speakers and also thank our audience members for their wonderful questions. We're actually ending a little bit early, so if you want to stick around and ask questions of our speakers, feel free to post them in the chat space, or you can unmute your microphone and ask a live question. And I will, let's see, I'm going to stop the recording here, but invite everyone to stick around for some additional time for questions.